Okay. So I want to say hello and welcome to everybody. I am Judith Lindberg, the founder and director of the Writers Circle, and Michelle, you are
I'm Michelle, co-director of the Writers Circle.
We are very excited to have this panel today. It's something I've always dreamt of having, and really, it's because I happen to be blessed to know our two novelists personally that had this miraculous opportunity to have their works put onto the small screen. So if not for that, I don't think I could have pulled this off. So I have to say thank you guys. Before I get into our formal introductions, Michelle's going to just tell you a little bit about what we have going on at the Writers Circle.
So many of you are currently our students and already know this, but the Writers Circle, we run both workshops and events for everyone from grades 3 through senior citizens, and we love them all. We are currently working on our spring session, which should be up in a couple of weeks, if not sooner. So definitely take a look at that. And we have events again in starting in April. So you can go into our events page to look at things.
And just for everybody's reference, we have lots of online classes. So if you're not local to the suburban New Jersey area, you can still join us. It wasn't that way before the pandemic, but it is now.
So, Judy, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you and our panelists so we can get started.
All right. So, welcome to Page to Screen. We call this grasping the brass ring because I always think of the merry-go-round and the old proverbial brass ring, which I've only seen in New York City on the merry-go-round in Central Park. But it really feels like that is what getting your work made into a television or a television series or film feels like. It's that magical, almost impossible event that can, really make a difference in your creative life. So we're very honored to have some really impressive panelists with us today. And I will do brief introductions. Pamela Redmond is the New York Times bestselling author of the novel Younger, the basis for Darren Starr's hit TV series. She's the author of 20 books of fiction and nonfiction, and also the co-creator of Nameberry, which is the world's largest baby naming website, and a huge source of naming opportunities for all of my kids' classes. They're like, I don't know what to call my character. I say, go to Nameberry. So thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Helen Wan lived and worked as a lawyer in Manhattan before becoming a writer and speaker. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, and many other publications. Her novel, The Partner Track, which is often taught in law schools and colleges, inspired the Netflix series, which premiered in August of 2022. Danielle Roderick is a writer based in LA. She was nominated for a Writers Guild of America award for her work on AMC's The Terror. And her television credits include The Right Stuff on Disney Plus, which is one of my husband's favorite shows, I must tell you. He loves space stuff. She's worked on several projects in development for major studios and production companies, and her nonfiction has appeared in The Hairpin, The All, Vulture, Mashable, and Travel and Leisure. And Kate Juergens has been a creative executive at Disney, the WB, and NBC, along the way having the privilege of working with the creators of hit shows such as The West Wing, Frasier, Will and Grace, Felicity, Popular, The Gilmore Girls, Greek, The Fosters, and Pretty Little Liars, which is like, are you kidding me? That's an amazing list of shows. She is currently a script consultant and a serial home remodeler, which I'd love to hear about, but probably not today. All right, so welcome panelists, welcome guests, and let's get this conversation rolling. I think I'd love to start by finding out what your journey has been getting to the screen and how all of this happened. And since we have very different sorts of creatives with us, I want to start with our novelists, Pam and Helen. Let's start with Pam.
Well, Younger came out in 2003 or 5. I think I wrote it in 2003. And I immediately thought it would be a great TV show because, you know, it was a great part for an actress in her 40s where she got to look hot and act soulful, you know. It for 10 years, it got optioned again and again, but it never got made. And then Darren Star stepped in and scooped it up. And by that point, I didn't believe and it would ever get made, but indeed he made it, and he made a wonderful show, and it ran for 7 seasons. So that's been great.
That's fantastic. Helen, how'd you get this magic happening?
I completely not by design. And if you if you had taken me aside when I was a young, you know, just starting out lawyer in a large law firm in Manhattan and tried to crystal ball things and told me that, hey, one day your journal scribblings to and from work on the subway will be a Netflix show, I would have laughed. But it came true. It's very much been a Cinderella at the ball type of journey. And I just feel really thankful for, you know, what happened, which was just that when I graduated law school, I, like the protagonist of my novel, was a young, you know, female associate at a large law firm, toiling away, and writing about that experience became my sort of creative outlet. You know, I would write early in the morning or whenever I could in bits and pieces of time when I could. And I was lucky enough to get representation. And then, and like what Pam had just said, I was fortunate enough that it got optioned, you know, fairly quickly. But then, you know, all the stars must align. And they didn't for quite a long time. And then finally one day I got a very, very, very happy phone call from my agent who said, hey, are you sitting down? And I was like, okay, all right. and he said, I think this time it's for real. I think that Netflix is interested in making this. So
Sorry.
And yeah, and so it premiered earlier this year. I mean, sorry, August of 2022. We're in 2023 now already.
So I think it's really wonderful that we're able to have Danielle and Kate here, who are really coming from the other side of this whole thing. So let's hear from Danielle. How did you end up becoming a television writer?
Not by design, but maybe secretly by design. I don't know. But I was a fiction writer, and that was kind of where I was spending all my creativity. And when I moved to LA, I started doing research work, because that was my other kind of secret superpower, was doing crazy narrative research for folks. So I started working with directors and production companies to start pulling the historical information to build a world that would be really useful to a writer that they didn't have the time to deep dive on. And the cool thing about that was I got to work one-on-one with all of these writers and creators. And so I got to see the system from the other side without having to know what I was doing totally. So I got to learn the industry a little bit. Wow. And then I had a novella I had written, and that became my writing sample, and that got me in the writer's room.
Wow.
Yeah, so and it was, you know, turns out that my writing really I was very excited to finally get to write officially, get paid for it. That was very exciting.
I agree. That's always exciting.
Yeah. And the wildness, I gotta say, the last is like the wildness that you write something and somebody goes and makes it. Like a car, like a car that has ridiculous doors. This was before Teslas, like that where the doors open up, and then somebody just like buys a car and they engineer it and make it. It was very different from fiction.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, very different than fiction indeed. That's amazing. And Kate, your story, I'm sure it has taken a different path. How did you end up in the as a creative executive?
Well, like everyone else, not by design. completely sort of accidentally. I had just moved down here from New York, and I'd been in the fashion business, and I don't know, I just sort of looking around for a job, or you know, where I wanted to go, and I figured LA entertainment, and I started out at CAA, which is a big talent agency here in LA, and quickly decided that TV was a much better fit for me than film or a talent agency. and you know, spent a long time trolling along the bottom as an assistant, and then eventually got promoted and got to actually work with writers one-on-one, which was, you know, it was a job I would have done for free. So I felt really, really lucky.
Yeah. That's the
I
best
used to
kind of
describe
job.
my job as like talking on the phone and going to lunch. That's my job.
That's a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. So I do have to note that, you know, it's all women on this call, which is pretty amazing. I don't think that's, from what I hear in the news, that's not the norm in Hollywood. So yay. Just, you know, sorry any guys on the call, but I had to say something about that.
Or anywhere.
You know, anywhere, yeah. So, Kate, why these books? And you know, it's always kind of curious what novels or memoirs become television or even films, and what makes a particular kind of book appealing and something else not so appealing.
Well, from my side, it usually came from a writer who was interested in the book, and the sort of more traditional path is that book agents will interface with their colleagues in the TV and film world and pass on books, you know, and make sure that they get books ahead of time that look like they're going to be successful books. And then those agents usually send them out to their writers like Danielle and say, you know, do you respond to this book? It reminds me of something, you know, that you've been interested in, or we think that Warner Brothers is really interested in this. Do you have a take on it? And you hear different pitches. So that's the most traditional way for what was my side of the business to get it.
Okay.
It's very rare that the creative team at a TV or studio would read the book first, and then, but yeah, sometimes that does happen if you acquire, but usually the studios acquire the books first, and then they come to you.
Oh, interesting. So Danielle, you're the more likely person to bring a project if you're the TV writer, correct?
I've done a lot of the times what I do, like with my agents, is I read something, I get a little excited about it, and I immediately shoot off an email being like, are the rights available? And they'll contact the publisher or the literary agent and find out. And sometimes, you know, I've gotten emails back that are like, they are available, but you're too tiny. You know, like they're waiting for a big fish. You know, or they aren't available, but they're at this production company. So then we set up a meeting with that production company, and I tell them like why I'm so excited about this project. And then, or they're just not available sometimes, or they're like in weird holdup where they've been like Pam was saying, hers were kept getting rolled over and rolled over. There might have been somebody else like always trying to check in and get it, and right before they could, it like went somewhere else. That seems to happen a lot. But the other, what was I going to say? I feel like what happens a lot too is like I'll be talking to my manager and say, I want to write a script about like a mother-daughter relationship. Like I'm really interested in the, you know, not just our expected story about mothers and daughters. And so she's part of a big management firm that has a lot of content. So she's like, oh, I'll ask our book people, and they'll just give me a list of all of the stuff that they own. That's all that has mother-daughter themes in it. And then they'll throw that to me. And if I want to, I can read through all of them and then find a producer to hopefully develop one of those with. Or like another project I'm working on, we were saying we were really interested in mysteries. And so we got a big list of mysteries that another management firm owned. But it was long. It was like 150 books.
Did you read them all?
I did not. We read a lot of synopses, and then we kind of picked like 5 that caught our eye the most. and then still had to fight for some of those. Like one of them was also like a feature writer wanted one of the ones that we really wanted, and we had to really come in and say why we were the right people for it, not the feature.
Wow.
But yeah, but a lot of it is, and like, sorry, the last thought I had was like I get excited about espionage stuff. So like I'll have an idea and then just be like, can I find a nonfiction book that nobody knows about?
Mhm.
And then I can maybe use that as the base. And then when I'm going in, it sounds like I have IP, but it's really on my stuff, but I get to like attach it to the IP a little bit.
Oh, interesting. So like if you have your own idea, it's not so easy to pitch it, but if it's sort of based on somebody else's, then it's easy.
Okay, my sense is like everybody wants IP more than a independent project. Like it's always strengthens your case or gives you a little, I don't know. Do you feel like that? I feel like, do executives just feel better if there's IP attached?
Well, also it's much easier to sell it to your marketing people. It's like it's already been out there in the world and there are already people that have heard about it. So you're piggybacking off something that's already a bit of a moving train.
Because you do hear a lot of, and this isn't like a new thing. This is from, I think even like in the 50s, they did this, is they have an idea, they have a script, then they go write a book based on the script, sell the book, and then they can make the project, or like do the podcast or do the article, you know.
Interesting.
Or even self-publish the book. Some producers do
folks
that.
who, like paid a journalist to pitch the article that they've already done all the stuff on, you know, and then so it's a weird,
Wow.
weird little dance.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Did both Kate and Danielle, did you have anything directly to do with either Younger or Partner Track? I'm just curious. No?
Just you or just a fan.
Just okay. I didn't think so from your resumes. I figured I would have caught that, but it was just interesting. And I think I also heard something in there that something that looks successful when they're when an agent or a publisher is trying to, you're looking for something that already has sort of some energy behind it. Am I right?
It's really helpful.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. Sometimes they're just like, just find something that exists about this thing.
Wow. Okay. So it can kind of...
Kate has been in the bigger waters too. So Kate, you know, like if that makes any sense, I feel like, you know, I bet it just you can make a much bigger project much faster if it's a very hot book, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So for example, having heard that both Younger and Partner Track kind of waited, and then it just had to happen at the right time rather than say Lessons in Chemistry or something that was a big hot
Right.
book this year.
Or, you know, little fires everywhere. Or...
Right.
Yeah.
When you think of like Outlander, which took like 20 years to adapt, you know?
That's interesting.
Like,
Yeah.
and I think that was like, just nobody could quite figure out how to do it. And then the author really wanted it to be perfect. And, you know, so that was a waiting game that definitely worked for them.
Yeah, that one was hugely successful. Fascinating. Okay. So what is the process like during writing the scripts and the casting and the filming? And I think with the authors, let's start with you guys. Were you actually involved in the process once you got the project greenlit? Did you get to do any of the writing? Were you consulted? Were the door slammed in your face and said, leave us alone? What happened? So Helen, how about you?
Sure. Definitely not the latter. No doors were you know, it was just really, it has been a great experience. Like everyone has said here, it really is a sometimes impossible to predict waiting game. And so it had gotten, so the Partner Track, my novel had gotten optioned, but then actually what happened was that the rights expired. And there was a particular Georgia Lee's wonderful showrunner who had just read the book, and others had told her to read the book. And she only told me this later, once the show was actually in actual production in New York, that she said, you know how I even, you know, came to this was that so and so, you know, and I had read it, but the rights had been tied up. And she said, and she pointed to a particular scene that had resonated with her because it had reminded her from a scene from something she had experienced in her life. And she told me that, and she said, and that's when I said, I want to make this, you know? So, anyway, but as I mentioned, all the stars had to align. And yeah, so from my perspective, when I got that wonderful call from the CAA and my literary agent the same day saying, hey, I think this is gonna really happen. Because for a long time it hadn't, because, you know, during pandemic times, et cetera, every industry has faced so many challenges, right? Production challenges, stops and starts. But when it looked like, no, this is actually going to head into production now, you know, it was a very, you know, it was my first rodeo, and I feel like they really did try to involve me in certain creative, you know, conversations that were happening. Obviously, the show ends up not 100%, of course, following one's novel. Obviously, that's to be expected. But I was consulted on kind of the primary, really key changes from my book to the, you know, to the screen, and I really appreciated that. And I was, you know, obviously this will surprise no one in the audience, that as a first timer, you just don't have that much, you know, you know, approvals, creative controls, etc. But I do appreciate the fact that they really did everyone tried to keep me in the loop on certain creative changes, creative decisions that were being made, and to kind of discuss together the rationale for them. And I had a very good experience. It was a thoughtful process, and I really, really appreciated both the cast and crew that wound up working on the show.
Yeah. And so if in those creative consultations you had a strong objection, would they listen?
To be perfectly honest, I didn't have a strong objection to any of the kind of storyline, you know, plot changes or casting decisions that they were telling me about in advance. I really appreciated the fact that they were telling, you know, consulting me collaboratively and thoughtfully in advance, because I do know some fellow author friends who maybe didn't have that experience. And so I had managed my expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised by what happened.
We're very lucky. That's great. That's great. Pam, what about you? Especially you had so many seasons.
I had so many seasons, and you know, Darren Star is an auteur, and he writes his own shows and creates his own shows. But he was always very welcoming to me. He invited me to the very first day of shooting, which was amazing. And you know, I went to the writer's room and sat in the writer's room, and they'd ask my opinion. But I think that two things. One is that being involved in the show, either nominally or in a way that you make money or in a way that you have any creative control, would be a big bargaining chip that really, you know, a well-known writer with a best-selling book might get. But if you're someone with a 10-year-old novel that was never a bestseller, that's just too much to ask. And I think that a lot of showrunners, especially someone of the stature of Darren Star, don't want, you know, another person in there saying, you know, trying to take control of their creative product. So, you know, I probably feel great about this because I love the show. I thought in some ways the show was better than the book. So I'm super happy, but I can't take any credit for it.
I think that's really honest and true. That my thinking, that was sort of the implied assumption with the door slamming thing, that you didn't really have a lot of say in the matter. But I think you're right. Like when I talk to my students who are writing screenplays or plays, I'm like, you're building the skeleton, but it's the production, the acting, the directing, the whatever that becomes the final product. So I think that that's sort of what I'm hearing in this conversation. That you
It's so much bigger than your book.
Yeah, exactly.
And just to piggyback on something that Pam, you just said, when I was lucky enough to visit set and also, you know, attend the wrap party in New York, which actually took place about 4 blocks from my actual law office, actually.
Wow. That's crazy.
But anyway, so when I got to set that day and I stepped off the elevator, I mean, it was kind of triggering, right? Because it was so realistic that, I mean, they really had made it feel like a big law firm. But I met everyone and they were all so wonderful, and it just was a very happy kind of just an amazing day. And several people made the comment to me at the wrap party, oh, it's great when the novelist can actually come to a set and the wrap party and that when it all works out. And I said, oh, well, what do you mean when it all works? When it all works out? What does that mean? And this one of the production team said, oh, well, because sometimes, and he said, I've worked on a lot of productions where sometimes the novelist will come in and say, oh, no, this wouldn't be sitting here. It would be like this.
Really?
But you weren't like that at all. And I'm like, oh, okay. I said, no, I can't imagine being like that, because most novelists that I know are just so grateful that their books are actually being adapted for the screen at all.
Yeah.
But yes, but so that was an interesting learning from that.
Yeah. And yeah, I imagine. So Danielle, and let's start with you. Working with the creative executives, the TV writers, being in the writer's room yourself, how do you relate to the material and the authors themselves as far as how you evolve a piece from a novel to a show?
Oh gosh. So like one thing I have in my head to that is I'm adapting a piece right now where it's a mystery story, and we are keeping the complete structure. And the author has said, "Go with God. Just I want my book to get made. Just yes, whatever you need." And we are radically changing it. We're changing the location. We're changing the culture. We're changing like it's not a comedy, and we're making it much more kind of satirical and funny. But the thing that's so golden about her book is the book itself is great. And there's also this incredible spine under it of this meticulous plot she's made. That's a killer mystery. And we're keeping that very much intact, and that's staying, and her characters are staying. They just are in a completely different place. And that gave it kind of a pizzazz and a modernization that producers were very excited about. And that as writers, I'm working with a writing partner with this one. And we're both very excited about it. And I think with that one, we really felt like, because it's a classic British thing, it's like, well, what's the fun of transplanting that to America? And like, how can we modernize it in that way? And then also, how can we communicate the same themes, but in a way for a larger audience than that specific audience? So that really came to play with that one. But other projects I've worked on, I think some of the things we think about a lot in the writer's room, like on The Right Stuff, it's the Tom Wolfe book that's very famous. And there's also a very famous movie, so you're adapting almost from two things.
Wow.
And it was like, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Wolf of Wall Street?
Oh no, The Right Stuff.
Oh, right. Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah. And in that one, like one of the big conversations we always had was, why do we make this story necessary to tell again? Like, why does it need to be adapted? It's already been told twice very well, very belovedly. So what are we doing by recreating all of this? Is it just to expose it to folks who aren't familiar with the story? Because that doesn't seem like quite enough, and so we were really connecting that story of the 50s and 60s and American ego and American masculinity and the Cold War, and like, how did that affect the American identity now? And especially now that celebrity culture is kind of skyrocketed in this whole other way. So that was kind of our way in for that. But a lot of the big question is like, what does this tell us about now? And on The Terror, which was a best-selling Arctic ghost story, which is a really delicious, spooky event. It's like this thick. It's a huge book. tons of research. It's like a Moby Dick. It's, you know, it's really big. It was like, how do we distill that? Because this is going to be a limit. This is eight episodes. So how do we really bring out its beauty and its form and slice it in a way that won't, you know, feel like we're ripping the heart out of this thing.
Wow. Yeah.
So those feel like really big questions, and sometimes the author's intent just isn't as present in the room as whatever caught the showrunner's eye, what made that story so special, you know. Yeah.
That's where the evolution and the transformation comes. You're really using the author's creation as a jumping off point, not necessarily just to represent what they've created on the screen.
It sounds, I mean, if I'm the author, I don't want it to be that way. But when I'm in the writer's room, I do want it to be that way. So, but I also haven't worked on a show where you know, Tom Wolfe had already died.
Right.
And his what's it called? His estate was just was just like, yes, go forth. And I want to say Dan Simmons wrote The Terror. I think that's right. He had very, you know, he was just kind of, he really trusted the showrunner's vision, and they had really met for a long time, and he really trusted the showrunner's passion for that book. And so he would come in on calls, but he wasn't very, I think it was just that I think the showrunner author relationship had been very solid. So he felt very comfortable with us diverting the story quite a bit. Yeah.
And Kate, what is exactly the creative executive's role in a transformation from book to screen? And are you involved in the casting, or do you monitor the scripts, or how does that part of the world come in?
Yes and yes. I think the most successful collaboration I had was on a book series called Pretty Little Liars. That again, one of those projects that had been optioned by, I think, 3 different studios, and different writers had tried to take a crack at it, and it had never gotten past a script stage before. And there was a writer that we'd been really interested in working with for a very long time. And when her agency brought her this project, and she came to us and was like, what do you think about this? And we had also loved the books. And we were like, oh, that sounds like a perfect match. And so we worked with her through she wrote, you know, she didn't read any of the other scripts. She just worked off the books, which is a tricky place. I imagine Helen and Pam had that experience too. It's like there's different iterations of your book out there. And so she came up with her own take on it, and we were all just so happily in love with it all the way along that it was a really smooth process. Actually, it just felt like one of those magical, you know, moments where all the parts come together at the right time. She was available, the book came up for option, the studio that we worked with closely got it, and it just all worked well.
You know, Kate, just when you're saying the different iterations too, like the other thing that can happen is a book can become a feature for a while, and then no, it's going to be a limited. No, it's going to be a multi-seasonal show, and it can just be like accordioning, like the story all the time. Yeah, and then the person who ends up making the show might have done all of those drafts or all of those versions, or it could have hopped around to like 15 writers.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is all happening before the public ever sees anything. It's all in the background while you guys are
It's
figuring out.
happening to like 99% of all the projects out there.
Oh my goodness, that's
And
exhausting.
The ones that don't. Yeah.
I've started to think of my own projects more in that way. You know, one of the novels I'm writing for Zibby Books is based on a television pilot I wrote that never got produced. But you know, now I'm reimagining that as a novel. I've been working with Kate on a TV show based on the novel that I'm in the middle of. So it's much, you know, maybe having it happen has kind of made me much more conscious of how the business works and how the 2 different properties or forms can work together and also be very distinct. But definitely, you know, having a novel idea that you're maybe struggling with that's so big and formless, and then translating it to a half-hour TV pilot can be a way to really focus, you know, even if you don't intend to sell the TV pilot.
Yeah. I'm actually finding this fascinating because, of course, I'm working with people all the time who are writing novels and screenplays and even TV a little bit, not very much because not my area of expertise. And I'm just sitting here with the writing part of it. And I'm trying to understand the path. Like, Pam, you've obviously written all these books. You've had work turned into a TV series. You guys are working together, which I want to hear more about, on an idea that you're kind of evolving. So when I sit down to write my little novels, I'm all by myself in my head, just writing a novel. How does it, explain how you kind of functionally go about your day as a writer with these possibilities of writing a script or, I don't know.
It's not any different because mostly I'm alone, but writing whatever I'm going to write. In the case of the novel, I would show Kate 50 pages or 100 pages and we'd talk about it. And there's another producer that someone Kate's worked with who was also giving notes. But in the end, it still starts with the book or the idea and the development of that. So it's maybe, having more input, but in the way that a book editor would give you input, or an agent,
Right.
or your writing group. In the end, you've got to get the thing onto the page.
That makes more sense to me. It sounds, when you say like your writing group, I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand. But you guys are bringing in this other expertise, which is fascinating. Go ahead, Danielle.
But also to know that even the book can exist on its own, in its own way, which does not prevent someone else who's adapting it for a TV property, a feature property, from bringing their own take on it. As Helen said, it's like they'll take it in a different direction, which still works. It's not what your story was, but it doesn't preclude that from happening down the road.
Interesting.
Pam's story has to function most successfully on its own, and then whoever adapts it for TV will add their own take on things, or spread things out, or go tweak things.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about was the movie Bones and All. If anybody saw that, it was a cannibal love story that came out this year. But Chalamet in it, it's a movie where two young people fall in love and eat people together. And, but it's adapted from a young adult novel. Forgive me, a Kate DiCamillo, maybe.
Yeah,
that might be the wrong name. Forgive me, because she might also have done Tales of Despero, which is about a little mouse who fights swords. So it's not her. But her, I believe her original book was all about veganism and about like cruelty to animals, and so her story, and the reason that it was a young adult story, was about, I really want people to examine meat eating and cruelty. And so when it was adapted, Dave Kujanek was the writer, and he saw it, his version of it, what he brought to it was this whole other look at like 80s America having an identity that doesn't fit into the landscape, that there's no place for. And so his kind of becomes this very different thing, but they're both very exquisite. And they couldn't have happened or hers definitely could have happened without him, obviously, but his couldn't have happened without her. And seeing that progression of that, and it's a really beautiful film. And so to see how that beauty could only have existed because he encountered that book, because a literary agent, not a film agent, was just like, you need to turn this into a movie, and sent it to him. And then that agent became a producer. So I find very interesting. Yeah,
that's very interesting. And I know that we have a lot of questions I surveyed for early questions. We have a lot of things about, do you get it from the agent, and how do you get to pitch these things? So that it came from the literary agent, and then the literary agent became involved in the project. It's very interesting. I think that literary agent, I also think, had like a correspondence with the writer where they talked about art for years. Like they were just like, I love this, I love this, I love this. And then this book kind of was part of that. And it was like Kate was saying, like, we know, like, you would love this, just trust me, read this. And so it happened, Fascinating. Okay. So let's see. It sounds very much like the sorts of things that change as you adapt something, whether it's from the book or in the creative process, is much more about reimagining the original material into something that more or less is its own unique art form. So I had originally thought what sorts of things change and why. It sounds like it's just a whole re-envisioning. Is that correct?
Well, also it has to get bigger, right? If
Mhm.
a book is a singular experience, whereas a TV show has to get bigger in every direction if it's going to go past, 6, 8 episodes and have subsequent seasons. Minor characters have to get bigger and get their own stories, and there has to be a whole world that exists that you can keep building out into.
Wow. So I know when I write, I've got tons of backstory material that no one ever sees. Do you ever ask the authors for that? I don't know.
I went, oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. I went into the writer's room once and I said something about the character Liza's backstory that I thought was in the book, but I guess it wasn't. And the head writer said, no, she quit working because she had a miscarriage and, she had a whole alternate scenario. So
And you're just like, oh, okay.
we both made it up. So
That's right. That works too. So that's great. So it sounds like both of you, Belle, Helen, and Pam, are pretty happy with the end result. Would you say that's true of what you saw your work become? Pam, go ahead.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
Really, it could not be.
Well, that's why you're living in LA and not Montclair anymore, I assume. But also, like, when you see it, like all these evolving storylines, it is bigger than your original conception. Do you feel like you become enlightened to your own story in some way?
Yeah, Darren added Charles, the second age appropriate. And, obviously a love triangle is a lot more interesting than a, love duo, however tortured. So that was great. And then, I wrote a sequel called Older, and this was after the show was already very successful. And so he had changed some of the names of my characters. And so I had to ask him, can I use your names? And he said, well, at this point, I think it would be kind of confusing if you didn't. But I wrote this in my book. Liza, the main character, is writing a roman clef called Younger. And the Hilary Duff character has moved to LA and wants to turn it into a TV show. And so it's kind of, meta exploring what happens when a novel gets turned into a TV show and what might not be so good.
Oh, so I think that's a recommendation to read Older, everybody. And Helen, since I know your experience is really fresh, and I went to that event you had in New York, and everybody seemed so very loving. That was from the production in that when I saw you. Yeah, you're happy with the end result. You feel like your story was up there on the screen.
I am. Honestly, I went into the whole creative this journey with no specific expectations. I really didn't know what to expect, and so when it was going to be released, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna watch these first couple episodes. No, I binge watched the entire season. Sitting, oh my God. My husband's like, hey, there are 10 episodes, there's time, but
I was like, oh, I didn't know they were going to do that.
but I just really genuinely enjoyed the show. It's a show that if I had just was searching for something to stream and found it, I would have started, watching it. And then again, I had been prepared for the quite significant creative changes that were going to happen. Like, for example, as Pam said, the addition of a love triangle instead of a more boring love duo. But the love triangle, which had been explained, who the new characters that they were going to introduce, and also coming up with more, I guess, deeper dive into more robust backgrounds and storylines for existing characters from my actual novel. And I thought they did a great job realizing those.
Great.
And yeah, it was really just the kind of show that I would have enjoyed watching myself. And anyway, and also worlds collide when I'd be picking up my 10-year-old from a play date and the parent would have it on in the background at home.
Did that really happen?
And I'd be like, oh my gosh. And then the mom would be like, hey, have you seen the show? Like, actually, you're a lawyer, aren't you? Like, it's
I didn't realize that it was. That's good. That's really funny.
like something.
And what about for Danielle and Kate? I'm thinking about all those iterations and the, is it a film? Is it a limited series? Is it a multi-season series? How many of those have you worked on and seen not happen? And how many have you actually been able to see come to fruition? Danielle.
I mean, I've worked on a lot that have not happened because I think that's what happens in the majority of projects. But it's not sad as it sounds because you're getting paid for that time.
That's good.
Yeah, often, not all the time, but often. But a lot of things just don't get made. Like you can spend 5 years on something, 10 years on something, and it, it's not going to happen. And then in my personal work, I've worked with other writers who have not just write stuff in terror, but with other writers in other ways of supporting their projects, where then there are shows that are out there and have been huge successes and have really oomphed the novel sales for those novels. Right. But in my own work, that's still a struggle I'm really working. I'm trying to adapt a novel that kind of got me into the business, and it's really hard to separate yourself enough from the thing that you worked on as a novel to let go of everything that needs to be let go of to make it a new thing and a really good form for TV.
Wow, so you're adapting your own original novel into something that could be for television. Wow, that would be very difficult.
But it is everything, you just have you get a little snowblind and you love what you love, and it's kind of like sometimes it really helps. I don't know. There's awesome showrunners who are also the author, like Gillian Flynn, right? Like she does both. It's great. But you can see why it's easier sometimes to have somebody else do it because they can slice and dice in a different way than you can.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to imagine how I would do that. I would not be able to do that.
And the other thing is novels are so intensely psychological and TV is so visual that you can't have a 3-minute run where somebody's telling you everything they're thinking and feeling. In the novel, you can't.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kate, what about audiences? Once the material does make its way out into the world, how do people in the industry decide why some series last 7 seasons and some don't? And, how are those decisions made?
Basically, it's are there enough people watching it? and you learn, you find out right away. You find out immediately when something goes out over streaming. People start responding over social media really fast. And if if you're starting to get a lot of attention, a lot of conversation, also critics, it goes out to critics ahead of time. And so you get a little bit of sense, sense early on about how people are in general responding to the product. It's is there a level of excitement? Are you having to force feed it to people? Or even to talk them into something over and over? Or does the ball sort of start rolling on its own?
Right.
It's really kind of magical the way that happens. It's if you have the right pieces and it's coming together, people are excited and they want to share that excitement now. And now you can.
Yeah.
Right. And
social media.
Post on it in a million different ways. And that really helps.
So I'm just thinking about the incredible amount of entertainment in all mediums right now and how, how does one show grab the attention in this noise storm of all the choices out there? Do you guys do anything unique? I think it's the same problem in publishing.
I mean, that's
you know?
always the question, right?
Yeah.
That's always the question. How much does marketing help? How
Mhm.
much does, word of mouth help? How much? And it's impossible to quantify those things. It really is just synchronicity, honestly, for the most part.
Yeah.
The right people catching the right attention, talking to the other right people. And I mean, there's always this marketing cliche about people have to be touched in like 3 different times or places, or 6 different times or places, like meaning a billboard and a promo, a conversation with a friend, a print ad. I mean, but no one knows.
Right.
No one
exactly.
really knows.
No, it's the same exact challenge with book publishing. I'm sure we all know that, you do everything you can and then you hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
with a much lower budget in book publishing. So,
yes, much lower.
all
Exactly.
around. And just as a writer, realizing that, to make a TV show, even one episode is so many millions of dollars
Mhm.
brought to bear. It's a different,
And hundreds
it's a
of
different
people.
kind of,
Yeah, and hundreds of people. Absolutely. Yeah, just the idea of getting over the hump to seeing it get greenlit is,
yeah,
that's
There
from
are
what Danielle
many,
did.
many humps before that. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
Many
Which-
little green lights along the way.
yeah. So this is a perfect segue to some of the questions that I have that were pre-screened, but I want everyone who's on the chat, feel free to jump in with your own specific questions. I do want to remind you that this is not a pitch session, so don't tell us about the project that you're dying for everybody to, bring to the small screen or the big screen, because, we all have one of those. Let's talk about the process. Let's talk about how this thing gets done, advice about, steps and so on. So my first question comes from Nancy Burke. So Nancy, if you're there, say hi. I don't know where you are. I can't see. But
I know
anyway.
Nancy. Hi, Nancy.
Oh, yeah, I knew there was a
I know her.
connection. Yeah. Anyway, so Nancy wrote in, how does the process of finding production teams for a screenplay or television script mimic or differ from the process of querying for an agent and a manuscript? And so I think we're talking about kind of, all of you guys except for Helen are out on the West Coast, and it seems like you go to coffee the same way that I go out with Helen. So, how does a creative with a product kind of find their way to getting the material to people like you?
Oh, was that the question?
That's the question. I think that's the question. Am I right, Nancy? Okay. Anyone?
I feel
Well, they
like
probably don't want to get it to me, because I
No.
really can't do anything for them. So, but
Yeah.
Danielle or Kate in different ways.
well, it's a hard question, because I feel like you're feeling the wall and you don't know if there's a door there, but you got to keep feeling the wall and it's dark, right? So you're just like, my husband has this great saying that's not, other people have said it, but it's his kind of go-to, which is like, you can't control your opportunity, you can just control your product.
Yeah.
And so having something that you feel like this represents totally what I can do, and I own it and I love it. And then the opportunities do show up. It's just like, often they show up and you're like, oh God, I didn't write anything. I don't have anything, boo. But if you do have this glorious gem in your drawer that you can shoot right off, you're in a totally different place.
Yeah.
Is there
And I
go
would
ahead,
have to
Kate.
say that realize that it's a business,
Mhm.
right? It's not going to happen by accident, and it's not going to happen by you sitting at home alone. It's like, you have to acknowledge that it's a business and that there are ways that business happens, and you have to sort of plug yourself into that, work to meet agents or who can forward, or writing teachers or people that that can connect you to that next level out in the world. And I would say that people who live in the 2 big media centers do have a leg up, because you're already your circle of people might know, you'll be that 6 degrees of separation from someone. It really is sort of working all your connections and acknowledging that that's what it is. It's a job. It's a job for many people, and it is a business, and there's a way in. But yes, as Danielle said, it often is feeling your way along too. But the closer you get to it, and the more people you connect to who can connect to those other people,
Yeah,
that's how you get there.
yeah.
Sorry, Judy, I want to just jump in. There's a question that's been posed out there, which is, would a novelist who turns their novel into a screenplay have a better chance than someone who simply has the novel?
No, I don't think so.
Is there a reason? Just curious.
Well, as Danielle said earlier, they want a big name attached to it. If you don't have a name yet, that doesn't help sell your product in the business sense,
Unless, I don't know, unless your screenplay has some voice to it that's never, I feel like everybody's like, oh, we just want a voice. We just want a voice. So if you have something that nobody else has, and I don't know, Kate's looking a little more business.
Like, maybe.
But I don't know. I know folks who've been pulled from like South Carolina and suddenly have their TV show going, and they have like a very experienced writer partnered with them. It's their first hurrah, and it's because their script was very special. It usually doesn't stay special in that process, but there is like there's versions, but they're weird. I don't know. It's all nutty.
But I think the trick with what you're saying, Danielle, is that this person who maybe came out of nowhere in South Carolina had somehow a door to walk through to get the material that's very special.
Yeah.
And that's what Kate's saying, that it's about networking and who you know and who can you ask and pass this to this one. And am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
Who's being helpful to you and supporting your work, who loves your writing, and will make calls or, forward your project and onto someone else.
Yeah.
I have this, sorry, not to like keep spouting stuff, but I feel like a lot of like screenwriters who are working a lot, like one of their dreaded things is to get an unsolicited email with a PDF attached that has a script.
Yeah.
And it makes them a little squirmy liability wise, because there's like an issue of they can then be accused later of stealing something from that script, even if they never read it. It makes them a little squirmy because they don't have a lot of time, and like it's just I over and over I've heard people say like, I wish this person had just asked me if I would be willing to read and then sent me the PDF if I said yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it doesn't occur to everybody because it's like, this is my one shot.
No, but ask first, and you're right. It's there's a huge issue with accusations of plagiarism.
It's a weird, it's sweaty out there sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I'm going to go to Helen and Pam, because I assume your agents are the ones who got the options in the first place. Am I correct?
Well,
The agents manage the contracts, but they're not the ones who've made the deal happen. They just sort of facilitate it.
Okay. All right. So like you may have known somebody in the first place and then your agent worked out the details or that kind of thing?
Darren Starr says he had read the book years before and kept wanting to option it, and it kept being taken. So I don't know how, what how it originally got
To him.
kind of, or to producers in LA. I assume it was because of the film agent.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Well, there are people who are book scouts that sort of are intermediaries between this is one way, but that are intermediaries between publishing companies and literary agents and TV and film studios. So a lot of people just out there, who love to read books and who are out there reading books and for their studios or producers and they read galleys and they read early drafts, and they sort of keep tabs on them, and that's one way that it happens. A lot of big trading things out here. But Pam also was in the publishing industry and the media industry for a long time, so she has a million zillion connections. I can't speak to Helen, but it's like she was in that business. So I don't know, Pam, maybe you want to talk about that a little.
But that business, and which is so New York centric and so book centric, and the LA business are two very different things. And my experience is that a lot of agents don't really know that much about they'll have a literary agent will work with a film agent, but do they really understand what each other is doing? No.
Wow. Even the New York literary agents. Wow. That's honest.
No. I got a new agent last year, and I chose someone, Joe Veltri at Gersh, who genuinely does both TV and books. But there are very few people like that. The more the norm is not really being aware. And I'm saying that in the case of the agents in LA too, that they don't really know that much about how the book business works.
Yeah, my agency is a creative agency, or like film and TV, and they only work with writers and directors, but there is one book agent in the agency who represents book writers. And I think the idea there is like, oh, she's your agent, you sell a book, then all the other, they try to get it adapted very quickly over to the other way. And it runs a little different than like CAA or something. Like, this is, my agency is called Verve. But I do think instead of keeping them so separate and not really talking to each other, their idea is like, let's cross-pollinate. But she's like a New York person who moved to LA specifically to try to make that bridge that you're talking about.
Interesting. Yeah. They are two different worlds. So
can I break in? There's a question on the chat that might be helpful to a bunch of people. What filled the space between a published book and getting optioned, and what exactly does it mean to get optioned? So for people who aren't sure what getting optioned means and what are the parameters of it, how does that work? If we could kind of walk through that.
I don't really understand the space question, but getting optioned usually means that a producer or a studio or a network will give you some amount of money that usually is not very much. And that will give them the option, which is where the word comes from, for a certain period of time, usually a year, to try and get it turned into a show. And if the year goes by and they haven't succeeded, they might drop it, you might drop them.
It's the rights to a project. Yeah, you own the rights to a project to sell the project for a year or 3 years with an option to renew it for another 2 to 3 years.
Right.
It might not even be any money.
Yeah, sometimes
might be no money.
I've done it where there's you can do like an if come, where you can, I think that's where like you talk to a writer and like you can say, I don't know if I can make something happen with this. I'm not a production company. I don't have a whole bank account that's just for buying properties. So can I play with this for a year and be the person? And if something happens with it, then you'll get paid this. But the other thing too is not all books have to be published to get optioned. Like a lot of nonfiction book proposals will get optioned, or even fiction books that have a lot of hubbub. Like they'll start attaching screenwriters on them while the book itself is being written.
Wow, really? So this goes to another question that Nancy and another person had, is that it doesn't matter if you're with a small press or a university press, or even if you have a great idea that isn't even published yet or even necessarily written. It's all about getting into the right door, finding along the wall. Is that correct?
Yeah, that seems right.
But would you say it doesn't matter, Kate? I wouldn't say it doesn't matter.
Well, the bigger name you are, the more successful. I mean, Helen was a very successful lawyer, so that speaks to her understanding that world. So she probably has a leg up over someone who's in law school writing. It's like, hey, right. But so each part of your resume is sort of helping build that, and it can help build it. It doesn't have to be the most conventional, straightforward way, but
you could also, if it's nonfiction, I've also seen it where it's like an article that gets published. That's something very specific and eye-catching, and that gets optioned. And then it starts, like, there was an article about a woman going on a lesbian cruise like 2 years ago. And that whole thing got, I don't know, I think it's a movie. I think it's already become a movie.
Really?
Yeah, or, and it was a travelogue. So if you have like something like you're writing a nonfiction book and there's something really juicy in it, you could also just publish that essay and see what happens from that.
Yeah, I know that Nomadland was a book, but it started, the first time I was aware of it was the article, I think it was in the Atlantic, about the people living, this caravan lifestyle. And it was powerful, and it was completely nonfiction, and it turned into that movie. So, yeah. Do we have more questions from the chat, Chris or Michelle?
We do have one more. Michelle Sassa asks, if a novelist and experienced writer wants to become a show writer and work in a writer's room, what would be the typical route? Get an agent? Would you submit your novel, or rather write a spec pilot or show episode?
All of the above, maybe, Danielle.
What's that?
All of the above, like,
Yeah,
go
it does feel
in
like
every direction possible.
every direction possible. I think the thing you will need at some point is a sample script. So definitely have the sample script. And I think everything else is going to help with that. But it does feel like even the places I've hit obstacles were like, I would love to give you this promotion. Like, for a long time, I had a novella as my sample, which was kind of like, it's allowed. You can have a prose sample, but it's hard to get people really excited about that. I was very lucky where my novella, it's a novella, so who reads novellas? Nobody. But it turns out that like a lot of people were excited to have a short prose piece to read because it was short. So more people in this industry in LA have read a novella than like anywhere else in the world. Anyway, but they always say, you gotta have, but like to really know you have the chops, I need to see your script. I need to see script pages. So my novella got me in the door, but I had to write the script pages to get the job.
Yeah.
But does that mean to get the job to get an agent, or to get the job to get hired?
My path is I got hired in a room first without an agent, and then I got an agent from getting my first job.
Got it. So then you're writing a spec piece that's in the genre of the show that you want to write.
You're writing a spec piece that is the best, most distinctive thing that you can produce, and it can be in any genre. And then, I had connections from my work as like a researcher, so that's how like I got kind of word of mouth got me that interview.
Right.
So, I think before that, then it's if you're coming way out and you don't have any of those connections, then getting into a room getting into a room already is really hard because rooms are much smaller right now. Shows are much shorter. Most people are hiring like 4 or 5 people, and most of them are higher up. So really like an entry level job is gonna be staff writer. And to get in there, you probably have to be offering something so specific to the show. Like they need an archaeologist who lived in Egypt, and oh my God, you are that person,
And whether you can write or not, you're an archaeologist.
No, and hopefully you can write.
And hopefully you can write too. Yeah.
And just one more thing, I'm curious about the day-to-day of that. Is in this day and age, are you literally in a room in either LA or New York with the other writers, or is it happening more virtually? And like, is that every day, like for months on end? Like, what's the typical?
It's not months on end anymore. It's like 10 weeks, 20 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks if it's a mini room. Like, I think a lot of people are still doing Zoom, or they do a hybrid where they'll do like Zoom for 4 days and they'll do 1 day together in office. Some people have gone back full, but most people I know are still doing Zoom, actually.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people aren't even necessarily living in town anymore. I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Well, you don't have, I don't know if you don't have to. I don't know that part yet, because I think once production starts, you might have to.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm looking to see if there's any more questions. Chris, do you have anything? I
have a question just for the novelists. So if you're a new novelist and you're working on something and you're sort of deep in it, would you suggest that they think about this stuff while they're writing, or just be in the novel, get the novel done, and not even worry about this until later? I mean, were you imagining this at all while you were writing the original work?
Personally, I was not, but it's so subjective writer to writer, I think, the answer to that question. In terms of, it depends on what if you even know while you are deep in the world of the, you know, the fun part, right? The imagining of the fictional world of your book. It depends on if you know, even at that point, what your, quote, for lack of a better term, end goal is, right? What's the end game? Are you trying to break into, you know, screenwriting? Are you trying to have it adapted for the screen, large or small? Are you just kind of, which is the way I write, I just need to kind of get lost in the fictional world, spit the pages out. Then, you know, once I have a complete, you know, polished manuscript that I'm happy with and can work with, I take it from there. I at least for me, I can't really, while I'm dreaming up dreaming up the slate of characters and dreaming up the fictional world, I can't really also be focused on, okay, and if I do this, then I'm gonna, you know, but that's just the kind of novel that I'm, the kind of you know, fiction writing process that I'm engaged in right now. Now, since I've had this experience under my belt, and I've seen kind of things I might have approached differently, things I would have done earlier, things I would have known about sooner, and perhaps done differently. Maybe I would not have had to spend so much time. I may not have had to spin my wheels so much. So I just think it's a very subjective, author by author answer to that particular question.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I'd take so long to write a novel in the first place.
But you know, I think because I live in LA and I have had this experience, and I would like to, you know, I'd love to do another show as a show creator and not just as a novelist who got optioned. So yeah, you know, I'm deep in this very intense process of writing this new novel that I hope, you know, will become a show. But right now, all I can think about is trying to make it the best possible novel it can be. And, you know, as Kate said, if it gets made into a show by me or somebody else, some of those elements might change too, you know?
Yeah.
I've once again failed to put in a romantic triangle.
Yeah, I just worry that, you know, sometimes it could be just a distraction to a writer to be thinking, well, you know, what this might be like in another iteration of it in another time, you know, kind of lose that like novel world. And, you know, they do seem very different, as Danielle was saying, you know, it's so sort of cerebral in the novel, but it's so visual once it's translated. So, you know, to kind of separate those two things. And I have, no, I don't have one other question. I thought I had one other question.
Well, one thing I keep jumping on. I'm sorry, I'm a jumper. Hey, that's what I do.
All good.
Yeah, but I do feel like that core essence, you know, needs to come through, and so like that's what you're protecting in either medium. And for me, one thing that's really changed is, and actually, so when I'm writing a script and I get stuck, I will go back to prose and I'll start writing prose to get all of like that subconscious juice up, because maybe the form of screenwriting is so Tetrisy and so like, are the pieces fitting? Am I doing the plot? And then if I go back to prose, I'll be like, oh my God, she's wearing blue boots. And like something starts moving. And then all of a sudden there's like a new energy shifting through the script that makes it hopefully much more me, much more something good. But then on the other side, TV outlining is so rigorous and so planned in a way that I never approach fiction with, that it really, really makes me understand the gift of outlining so thoroughly and really seeing something through to the end and making sure everything really does move, and that, you know, there's these arcs that are really tight. And so they can feed each other really nicely. I think, you know, you can play with one story at the same time sometimes, and both can become better for it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I feel like process varies so widely from writer to writer to writer, at least amongst the ones that I that I know and speak with frequently. I know a couple of authors who are both journalists and novelists, actually. And some of them, unlike me, can be very, can compartmentalize and just kind of go, okay, today I'm working on this and I'm going to I'm going to be churning out new pages on my novel. And then perhaps that afternoon even, or the next day, they can turn to a screenplay, some other project, or quote, more kind of like the business side of the job, right? Like the nuts and bolts, kind of, responding to the professional correspondence, and let me follow up on this contact. I'm going to set up a meeting with this person, a Zoom with this person. But it really is so just subjective, writer to writer, based on personality. I personally wish I had not spent so much time trying to outline when I just kind of ended up throwing away the outline and wrote 3 different endings until I found one that fit,
That's funny.
That's interesting.
That's just
Yeah.
me. Many other novels that I know swear by their outline.
Yeah. And they just, well, this is the constant conversation of are you a plotter or a pantser? Sounds like being a television writer, being a plotter is a good thing.
I think in TV, the writer's room is pantsing, right? Like everybody's pantsing, but then what's happening on the board eventually is plot. Is it plotting? Is that the word, or plot? It's plotting.
Plotting, P-L-O-T. Yeah, interesting. Wow, there's more to dig into here. So, I would love to give each of you the opportunity to talk about what you're doing next. And I want to start with Kate. Are you working on any projects right now that we can look forward to?
Well, I'm working with Pam, and I'm finishing up a house that's going up on MLS this week.
Oh, really? You were serious, huh?
Yeah.
Wow, good for you. That's a massive job.
I have a great partner in that. So yeah, those are my two big projects right now.
Good. And Pam, tell us a little bit about this book, or is it too soon?
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's the first book I'm doing for Zibby Books. It's a novel called The Matriarch. It's about a woman who's the head of a big family and business that all live and work together on the oceanfront in Montecito, and then her oldest son goes missing and throws everything into chaos. I've been working on this book for pretty solidly for about 3 years, and it's gone through a lot of different iterations. In fact, I finished an entire draft last fall where the son died, and I was on a plane going to New York, and I just thought, oh no, I think he disappears. And so I had to rewrite the whole thing. So, but luckily I have a deadline, so I have to stop rewriting. And
Good. I hear you. Sometimes it's good to have those deadlines. It's like hard stop.
yes.
Danielle, what are you working on right now?
The big project on my plate is we're finishing this pitch for this adaptation that we're doing from the British mystery novel. We're transplanting it, so hopefully that will get polished in February, and then we can take it to market in March, God willing. Yes. And then I'm teaching actually a class at Zibby called TV outlining for novel writers. So
good.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun. I do know a lot of novelists who are like, God, I wish I had just known this before I got into my second draft of the book. So I'm kind of trying to just demystify some of that for folks.
Great, fantastic. Helen, what are you doing?
Trying to be in the final throes of finishing a manuscript of a new book, a new novel manuscript. So yeah, on similar themes to The Partner Track, but not a direct sequel. Starring a whole new slate of folks, and I really love what Pam just said about being on a plane and realizing, oh no, actually that happened to me, and I spent some time having to rewrite a manuscript, because I realized at the end, oh my goodness, that's not what would happen at all. That's not what that protagonist would do at all.
I know. Why does it take till the end to realize that?
It takes to the end to get to know the cast of characters.
Yeah, I found out on the 7th draft something. I was like, why didn't I think of that 6 drafts ago? Anyway, it's part of the process, I guess. All right, well, if we have any last questions, or anybody want to just say a last thing?
There's just one last question here. Karen Rubenstein asked, does it have to be published or just an outline or chapter or two with characters? So I'll throw that out there. And I have one last question. Do you think that there's more opportunity for this now with all these streaming services? I mean, do you feel like this is like a big thing that, you know, novels are getting adapted just much more frequently? And that's it.
I think streamers gave you a completely different way to look at new shows. Like it made limited series came alive during streaming. Like that was something that wouldn't have worked in conventional broadcast television. But now it's a great thing, and feature actors love doing projects where they can really dig into a character over a long period of time. But you know, they still aren't signing up for 5 or 6 or 10 years of 10 years of their life. But I think I think different voices, different kinds of storytelling, different stories. I think it absolutely, there's a huge opportunity here that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah. And as for Karen's question about, does it have to be published? Thoughts? Anyone?
I'm not buying, you know, scripts, I mean, or books, but I think just characters and an outline or a few chapters, I think that's not enough. You know, I think it can be self-published though. I think that is something that you can take control of, but it needs to be something, you know.
Yeah. And if you're self-published, going to the same question of small press or whatever, you have to have a way to get through that door in that regard. Is that what you say? Yeah, I think that's the key question here is you have to have a product, and it has to be of some sort of polished capacity. And then you have to have a way to get that product to someone who can get it to the right people and make something happen. Am I summarizing the message correctly?
Or live on another platform where other people will see it and respond to it.
So tweets have become movies.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Or YouTube shows, or, you know, trailers.
But nonfiction book proposals have also, you know, like the book's not written, but that proposal sold and got out, and the publisher started hustling it, and you know, while it was being written.
Tweets have become movies. Do you know what?
One about, it's a stripper adventure. Zola, was it called Zola?
Oh yeah, it was the Humans of New York story, I think, that became a book.
Yeah, but it was a tweet. There was a tweet thread of a woman being like, "You're not going to believe what happened to me." And it was like 20 tweets, and it became a whole full, like a not for nothing movie. Yeah.
Wow.
The name.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, a lot of. I do know people have been hired on shows because of actually have a great script, but also just have a great social media presence. Because
funny on Twitter, definitely.
Yeah.
There is another question in the chat now about screenplay competition. And if you are a winner or finalist, does this bring you any attention?
Kate, what do you think?
Maybe it's changed. I have never read a script that came out of a screenwriting contest. I think that's a world that exists completely outside, because the people on my side are constantly looking for good script. Like that's all your job is looking for good scripts or ideas or projects. You're actively pursuing that. But contests, I have never had anybody say to me, here's a great script that won a screenwriting contest. That's just.
But sometimes as a prize, you'll get like a 15-minute call with an agent or something, or you'll get like sometimes part of the prize will be like a connection, and that you could do something with for sure. I did work in a room where a writer had won an AMC contest, and so AMC had like taken him on and like put him in one of their shows. So
yeah, well, I think there are a lot of them. You may know this better than I do, but like that charge people money to put their scripts into a screenwriting contest. I mean, something like AMC, again, they're actively out there looking for good material. So they're going to read
I think
everything.
there's a lot of like
there.
independent film screenplay contests that do kind of live in an independent space. Like they,
Its own world.
Right, right. But in theory, if it's like AMC, perhaps they're looking at the winner of the script.
Oh, yeah.
well, AMC will read those entries. So
Yeah,
you'd
that's
be
them
looking.
looking.
That's them looking.
Actively searching for material, research, actively compelling material. Absolutely.
Okay, good to know.
I do think a couple of those just got closed down. Like there used to be more. But
Really?
like Warner's had the writers workshop, but that got closed anyway. But
Mhm. Okay.
We have one more. Can we squeeze in one more?
Yes, go.
Okay. Michelle Sasa asks, how can a non-famous author get to keep creative control of their work? Is the only way by coming with your own financing. Haha.
That is one way.
There is an LOL, so but
That would
really,
be a
like, if
good
you
way.
want control, like, what would you need?
Producer, I mean,
Yeah, you have to be a producer. You have to get the leverage to be able to control it. And usually that comes through more and more success. The more successful you are, the more control you can potentially have, the more
That
leverage.
makes Yeah. I mean, that's true in every level of society. I mean, authors who get their books published generally don't have any control over the cover and a whole bunch of other things. They're just like, okay, thank you. Please publish my book. It's the same here. It's having the money. So I think this is great. You guys have really done a wonderful job of candidly sharing the ins and outs and the complexity of how this all works. And I do think that since many of us are here on the East Coast, the world of Los Angeles and Hollywood and whatever it is very different. So I cannot thank you enough for spending the afternoon with us, sharing your experiences, and really helping us understand how these things happen. So
thank you, Judith.
thank you so much. And
you.
thank you everybody for coming. I hope you learned a lot. All right. We hope to see you all at the Writers' Circle again soon.
Bye.
Bye.
I agree with everybody.
Bye.